The TARDIS has landed, with the Doctor regarding this as the point where Ian and Barbara will leave. He is still angered from Ian's joke about being unable to fly the ship. The pair make their goodbyes to Susan, with the Doctor wondering why they're still here, with them wanting to make sure that they are actually in the right place. The Doctor is certain they are, but gets them to check for themselves via the scanner anyway. Ian and Barbara are able to convince the Doctor to explore their surroundings on foot with them, wanting to part on more positive terms. The four of them, having exited the TARDIS, hear a noise which Ian discovers is a boy who informs them that they're actually in France and close to Paris. As the Doctor approaches the boy to ask for more information, he pushes Ian and quickly runs off. They decide to venture through the woods to find out where he could have gone, with the Doctor pointing out a house in front of them, with Barbara noticing it seems to be from some time in the past. Ian deduces that they could be 100 years out, with the Doctor stubbornly denying this possibility. The Doctor and Susan go on ahead to investigate, with the two others catching them up shortly afterwards. Ian tries to look through the house's front door, but can't see much due to the darkness. But the Doctor has found another door that is conveniently unlocked. The two split up, with Ian searching downstairs and the Doctor going up. Susan discovers a box full of clothes that Barbara identifies as being from the 18th century. They also find maps and daggers within the box as well. The school teachers discover that they are smack bang in the middle of the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror. The Doctor, walking around upstairs, is suddenly knocked out by an unseen adversary, while the other three downstairs have put on the period-accurate clothing. Susan reveals that the Reign of Terror is the Doctor's favourite period of Earth history, and that if he knew, they'd find it difficult to get him back to the TARDIS. As they prepare to go upstairs to locate the Doctor, they are suddenly held at gunpoint by two French men, Rouvray and D'Argerson, who inquire as to who they are. Barbara telling them they aren't French and thus have no sides in this conflict causes them to put their guns down. They all hear noise indicating other individuals are also present in the area, revealing the presence of an oncoming French army, who enter the house's courtyard, but they do not initially search the house itself. Ian decides to go look for the Doctor, while D'Argerson opens the front door of the house, revealing himself to the French Revolutionist army. Rouvray follows out after him. Rouvray is still able to command some authority with his voice, calling the soldiers peasants, before he gets shot quickly after. D'Argerson tries to make a run for it, but is dispatched as well. The Doctor is unconscious on the floor in one of the upstairs rooms, but Ian, Barbara and Susan have been captured by the Revolutionist army after they decided to search the house after all. The Revolutionists want to execute them in the courtyard, but their leader decides to instead take them to Paris as prisoners. They also decide to add insult to injury by setting the house on fire, with the Doctor being inside, unbeknownst to them, who calls out for help after waking up and noticing smoke entering the room from underneath the door. The boy from before is secretly watching the Revolutionists take Ian, Barbara and Susan away, while the Doctor collapses due to the smoke in the burning house. Ian, Barbara and Susan are to be placed into cells after being sentenced to death by guillotine. Ian is separated from the other two. The Doctor has been rescued by the boy they encountered earlier, who updates him on the situation, and he decides he must travel to Paris in order to rescue his fellow travellers. Barbara reminds Susan that their survival from their previous endeavours hasn't just been luck-based, but it's down to the decisions they made and the actions they took. Barbara is able to find some crowbars under the cell's bed, which will enable her to pry one of the stones off of the wall. She asks Susan to keep watch to make sure they are not caught. Another individual, Webster, is placed into Ian's cell, but he has been heavily bleeding, with Ian just being able to stop it. Webster informs Ian of another Englishman, James Sterling, who will inform the English of when France will be ready to attack England. Webster was sent to bring James home, with him now being too unwell to do this. He has tasked Ian to continue this on his behalf, with Ian also being given the name Jules Renan before Webster breathes his last. As the Doctor has made his way closer to Paris, he has come across a bunch of workers, where he ends up arguing with their guard and being forced to participate. Barbara has tired herself out trying to knock the stone off of the wall, with it also damaging the skin on her hands. Despite Barbara stating that Susan's hands are in a worse condition than hers, Susan decides to do it anyway to keep herself occupied, though she doesn't last long, leading to both of them deciding to rest. The two of them are given food by the jailer, who takes notice to the odd placement of blankets. Before he can move them, he gets called by his superior, Lambert, and quickly leaves the cell. Lambert enters Ian's cell and demands to know how long Webster has been dead for. Ian tells him that it's been several hours and that he didn't reveal any information. Lambert asks the jailer to confirm this, who is able to tell him that they did speak, but did not hear what the words were. Upon request, the jailer provides Lambert with the list of the prisoners, where he crosses out Ian's name and has Webster's body taken from the cell. After finishing their food, Susan decides to continue working to escape, only to notice that rats have now entered their cell. She gets up on the bed, while Barbara quickly pushes them away with the blankets. The two decide to give up with their plan to dig out. The Doctor, fed up of digging, agrees with the workers to plan an escape. He distracts the guard by claiming there's an upcoming eclipse, with the Doctor being able to use this opportunity to pickpocket him. The Doctor places the coin he pickpocketed on the ground and pretends he found it there. He convinces the guard it's part of some hidden treasure and manipulates him into digging himself, disallowing the others from digging, wanting to keep it all for himself. With the guard distracted, the Doctor knocks him out with a shovel. The Doctor resumes his travels to Paris, eventually deciding to sit down and rest. He gets back up and continues his journey, revealing he had sat on a sign that states that Paris is 5 kilometers away. Barbara and Susan are let out of their prison cell, where they are told that Ian was saved, but they are not so lucky, and are to be brought to the guillotine. Ian witnesses them being taken for execution via his cell. The Doctor has arrived in Paris, while two individuals, Jules and Jean, plan to ambush the execution. Lambert requests the assistance of the jailer, who is in the process of giving Ian more food. Due to Lambert's insistence, he ends up leaving the keys in the door. Ian notices this and is able to reach through the small window on the door and grab the keys for himself, where he takes the one for his cell and quickly places the rest back where he found them. As Susan and Barbara are being transported to the guillotine, one of the horses hitches a shoe, giving them a chance to flee, while Jules and Jean have caught up with their convoy. Before Barbara can convince Susan to come with her, the revolutionists are fired at, liberating the captured travellers. The Doctor, continuing to walk through Paris, comes across a clothing shop where he is able to manipulate the keeper into him being the regional officer of the provinces, arranging an exchange with his current outfit for period-appropriate attire, even giving away his ring for additional writing materials. Barbara and Susan are taken to a safe house and are prepared some food and a bath, with Jules introducing them to his sister Danielle and Jean before they state that they plan to make arrangements to smuggle the two out of France. Barbara and Susan protest this, however, due to the Doctor's whereabouts being unknown to them and Ian still being imprisoned. Ian decides that now is the time to use the key and make the escape, with him acting cautiously to make sure he isn't noticed. He comes across the jailer, who has somehow been knocked out. Ian quickly leaves before he wakes up. Barbara and Susan are provided a map, and they show Jules and Jean the house they found earlier. Jules and Jean reveal that they knew of D'Argerson and Rouvray, and they suspect that someone is leaking their information to the revolutionists. Jules promises to reunite the 4 travellers together, while Susan keeps getting headaches, which he suggests that she needs sleep to recover from. Another individual, Leon, enters the safe house and informs Jules and Jean that a man is looking for them at a nearby inn. Barbara returns and takes an instant interest in Leon, while the other 2 go to meet the man to discover his identity. The doctor has reached the prison and demands to be let in. He informs the jailer that Ian, Barbara and Susan fled from his province, with the jailer updating him on their whereabouts. The doctor is approached by Lambert, who arranges a meeting between them and Robespierre, the leader of the revolution. Leon gets to know Barbara, who assumes he sees English people like her as enemies, but he instead regards the English as people who have no interest in the current events taking hold of France. Barbara leaves to check on Susan, while the shopkeeper has arrived at the prison and states to the jailer that the doctor's ring is evidence against a traitor. The doctor and Lambert meet with Robespierre, where it is agreed that the doctor will make a first-hand account of the issues facing his region. Robespierre notices a lack of progress in the defeat of their enemies within the region, with the doctor trying to get them to see that there is no point in executing all these people. Robespierre admits that he doesn't want the huge death toll that lays before him, but he feels paranoid that they will come after him for not wanting the monarchy restored. The time has come for the pair to leave, with the doctor lamenting that they ran out of time before they could talk about his province, with Lambert starting to get suspicious. Susan is resting in the front room of the safe house with Barbara, having recovered from her earlier headaches, but Barbara worries that her illness could be worse. Leon states that they could consult a physician, but that would be risky as they are likely to report everything back to the revolutionists. Leon then remembers that he knows a physician who can carry this out, who he trusts. Leon has to leave as he cannot stay any longer, but he promises that he will update Barbara once he is able to get a hold of the physician to help Susan. As Barbara and Susan have left the room, Jules and Jean return, entering via the window. They lock the door, having brought an unconscious individual back with them, who is revealed to be none other than Ian. The shopkeeper wants to see Lambert to give him the doctor's ring from before, and while this is going on, the doctor tries to talk the jailer down so he can leave, but the jailer holds him at gunpoint as he tries to do so due to Lambert not wanting the doctor to leave until the following day. Lambert wants to keep the doctor's ring and clothes provided to him by the shopkeeper as evidence, with him being compensated for the loss of revenue. Ian starts to come round as Barbara re-enters the room and reunites with him being relieved that both her and Susan did not get executed. Ian informs Jules of what Webster had told him before he died, with Jules not knowing of anyone called James Sterling. They deduce that Jules is given as a contact for any English person, including Sterling, who seems to be undercover somewhere. Jules informs Ian that they plan to trace the doctor's steps from the house that burnt down and that they can search for Sterling at the same time, while Barbara returns, stating that Susan's condition is worsening. A day later, and the doctor tries to sneak out of the prison, only to be noticed by Lambert. Meanwhile, Leon has sent a message back saying the physician won't come to the safe house, so Barbara will have to take Susan to them, while Ian has a meeting arranged with Leon. The physician tells Susan that she hasn't been keeping care of herself and notices her hands are blistered, which they state is due to gardening. He decides to fetch some leeches, stating that Susan just needs some bloodletting and requires them to wait until he comes back. Barbara gets the impression that he is onto them, so they decide to leave, but he has locked them in the surgery, with Barbara being confirmed right when he informs the jailer of their presence. He returns with soldiers who capture the pair. Ian feels as if something has gone wrong, but Jules tells him not to worry, also promising to go and fetch Barbara and Susan for him, while he goes to meet Leon at a disused church. Barbara and Susan, being returned to the prison, meet with the jailer, who separates them, putting Susan back in a cell while Barbara gets dragged for questioning, but luckily for Barbara, it's the doctor who is to carry this out. Ian, arriving at the church, searches for Leon, only for it to be revealed that Leon set a trap for him this whole time, as he is surrounded by soldiers and held at gunpoint. Before Ian can make a chance to escape, he is forcibly shackled to one of the church's pillars. Leon wants information from Ian and states he will cooperate. Barbara updates the doctor on what has happened with Susan and the location of where she last saw Ian. Lambert tries to prevent the jailer from hearing their conversation, but the jailer states that Robespierre wants to see him immediately. The doctor manipulates the jailer into letting Barbara free, under the pretense that she could lead them to the other traitors. Jules discovers that Barbara, Susan and Ian have all vanished, while Leon reveals that they've been searching for James Sterling for quite some time, and wants Ian to spill the beans and tell him how he got to France. Ian tells him about the TARDIS, which Leon clearly doesn't believe, but before he can act, Jules has caught up with him and demands Ian's release. A firefight endures, where Jules shoots one of the Frenchmen holding Ian hostage and throws his rifle at Leon before he can return fire, while Ian is able to use his shackles to lift himself up and kick another Frenchman in the back. The conflict ends when Jules fatally shoots Leon. The doctor reunites with Susan, who's very happy to see he is alright and escaped the fire. The doctor talks further with the jailer, who realises the doctor didn't follow after Barbara. The doctor turns it on the jailer, making him take the blame for this blunder. Lambert meets with Robespierre, who reveals to him that a plot is being made against him, with Lambert stating he will make sure this is foiled. Barbara returns to the safe house just after Ian and Jules have returned there themselves. Barbara reveals the doctor's plan to Ian, who seems quite puzzled by it. She is also informed of Leon being a traitor and finds it hard to accept, causing her to argue with Ian about there being heroes on both sides. The doctor plots with Susan to plan their escape, with him tricking the jailer into thinking that she has disappeared. This causes him to open the door, which the doctor uses as a distraction to be able to hit him over the head with a vase, and quickly flee with Susan. Unfortunately, Lambert has caught them in the act and orders guards to surround them. Lambert orders Susan to be returned to her cell while he has a talk with the doctor. The doctor tries to reinstate his authority, but this is returned with the question of whether he recognises the ring he gave to the shopkeeper. The doctor denies having seen it before. Lambert states he could have arrested the doctor at any time, with the doctor wondering why he hasn't. Lambert reveals that due to the political climate, he thinks it's best that he have the doctor on his side in case he needs assistance. Lambert had also relaxed the prison rules for today, which would have allowed the doctor to leave at any time, but he knew the doctor would not leave without his granddaughter. Lambert states he will release Susan if the doctor helps him by revealing the location of Jules's safe house. Barbara wonders where Jules has gone, with Ian informing her that he has left to look for Susan and the doctor before he apologises for what happened to Leon. Jules returns, leaving the door unlatched, which annoys Ian as anyone could just enter the building. Ian's fears are proved right when the doctor arrives with Lambert. Lambert reveals he came along with no one but the doctor, that he was responsible for Ian's prison escape, and that he is James Sterling. The doctor is impatient and wants him to hurry up and enact his part of their bargain. James states he can use his position of authority to free all of them and allow them all to travel where they please, with Ian telling him all that he remembered from Webster. James talking about the plot against Robespierre jogs Ian's memory about a meeting at a sinking ship, which Jules knows as an inn on the Calais road. James needs the information from this meeting before he is free to help the travellers escape and return to England. Despite initial protests from the Doctor due to the risk, Ian and Barbara agree with James to go to the meeting due to both the Doctor and James being known to the individual known as Barras. The trio have arrived at the inn and have taken it over, Jules tying up the keeper and putting him in the wine cellar, while Barbara is disguised as a female server. Barras, who booked a room, arrives with Ian acting as a replacement innkeeper, stating the regular one is ill. He guides Barras to his room. Barbara gets Barras some wine and deduces from this that there will only be one other person arriving to meet him. The other guest arrives and it's revealed he is none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. They talk about how Robespierre will be arrested and that this time it will be successful, but Bonaparte needs convincing. Barras informs him that he can gain support with Bonaparte's identity as a public figure. Bonaparte accepts to be a part of a reformed government as long as they are able to successfully cause the downfall of Robespierre. Back at the safe house, Barbara and Ian inform James of this development, but he does not want Bonaparte as a ruler of France. He decides that the Doctor and Barbara must return to the prison in order to free Susan, and then meet up with him and Ian at an arranged carriage to take them out of Paris. They, in the meantime, will go to the palace to see if any developments have happened with the removal of Robespierre. Robespierre is frantically going through papers in his office when he hears the sound of approaching forces. He locks the door and grabs a weapon, while the forces bang on his door demanding he come out. They eventually are able to knock it open and take Robespierre to the prison by force. Barbara and the Doctor have found shelter near the prison as a storm approaches. Barbara decides to stay behind, while the Doctor goes to free Susan by further manipulating the jailer into thinking he was really a high-ranking undercover official planning to oust Robespierre and Lambert from power, ultimately convincing him to empty all the cells in preparation for the arrest of all of Robespierre's followers. The Doctor frees Susan from the cell, while Jules has arrived with the carriage, which Ian, Barbara and James had also been waiting for. The armed forces drag Robespierre into the prison, with the Doctor and Susan slipping out while they are busy. Before Barbara can tell James where they really come from, the Doctor arrives with Susan, and they all quickly get into the carriage and flee Paris, though not before James figures that the Travellers don't know their next destination. Back on the TARDIS, the Travellers talk about how they would have found it impossible to inform Bonaparte of his future. The Doctor states that their destiny is in the stars, and they must go and search for it. The 8th story produced overall, The Reign of Terror was given the production code of the letter H. It was written by Dennis Spooner and directed by Henric Hirsch, while Verity Lambert's producer stint continues. By episode 3, Hirsch had been taken ill due to difficulties with the studio facilities and disagreements with William Hartnell. Who replaced him isn't definitively known, but differing accounts suggest it was either John Gorey or Mervyn Pinfield. Carol Ann Ford remembers multiple people giving them direction, so it's most likely that it wasn't just solely one person, but multiple people who worked together to continue the production of the episode. All 4 main cast members from previous stories are present with this one, though yet again the holidays continue, with it being William Russell's turn to take 2 weeks away from the show, being absent from the majority of episodes 2 and 3, though like with Carol Ann Ford in The Aztecs, William Russell pre-filmed insert scenes for these 2 episodes, though when he re-watched the serial years later, he was surprised that he was featured in all 6 episodes. The 6 episodes were released on BBC One between the 8th of August and the 12th of September 1964, while they were recorded between the 10th of July and the 14th of August 1964. Lime Grove Studio D has been dropped and replaced by Studio G completely by this point, with the studio location being completely changed for the serial's final 2 episodes, returning to BBC Television Centre, as was the case with some episodes of the previous 2 serials. Before the Reign of Terror was commissioned, its serial slot was initially considered for a 6-part post-Spanish Armada serial written by script editor David Whittaker. By the 2nd of April 1964, Dennis Spooner was commissioned for his 6-part Reign of Terror serial, pushing back the ultimately never produced post-Spanish Armada story. Dennis Spooner had initially provided a 23-page story outline. Submission dates were planned for the 6-episode scripts, with the first 2 episodes to be submitted by the 8th of May, episodes 3 and 4 by the 22nd of May, and the final 2 episodes, 5 and 6, on the 8th of June. By the end of April, Dennis Spooner fully agrees to write his 6-part Reign of Terror serial, with him delivering scripts for episodes 2 to 4 by the 13th of May. With these plans in place, and the final serial of Season 1 having been locked in, David Whittaker was able to provide a synopsis about the remainder of Season 1 to the press. The 15th of June, as well as the 17th and 18th, had the production record the location insert shots for the Reign of Terror. This was the first serial to feature location shots, with Brian Proudfoot doubling for Hartnell, who shadowed him in the previous serial, The Censorites, to get a feel for his movements, to Hartnell's personal annoyance. This serial would also be the first time that an on-screen caption other than the episode title and writer would be used, that being the on-screen location indicator of Paris. Another first is the Doctor changing his outfit into period-accurate attire, a practice that would be continued for the remainder of historical serials before their eventual retirement. The working title for the serial was The French Revolution, a serial idea that William Russell had previously suggested to the production team. The end credits of the first episode have a unique effect, where the flames from the burning house continue to be depicted behind them. Episode 2 once had a working title of Guests of the Guillotine. The child in episodes 1 and 2, played by Peter Walker, was cast in the role by Henric Hirsch after he featured in a previous production by Hirsch, the television play Bloomsday. The jailer character was created to add a humour element into the otherwise quite dark and serious story. Timothy Coombe, a production assistant on The Reign of Terror, recommended several actors including James Cairncross as Lamate and Jack Cunningham as the jailer. Jules Renon's actor, Donald Morley, had previously worked with Jacqueline Hill in The Shrike. The original intention for the Doctor, instead of sitting on a sign that reads Paris, was for him to part some bushes and see Paris in the distance. A model of Paris was built for this effect, but ultimately it went unused. Carol Ann Ford took a shine to it and was given the model after the production, but sometime later, a cleaner she had hired accidentally broke it. Carol Ann Ford remembers that Hirsch wouldn't give the actors direction during a take, but would then claim that they were being maudlin. Carol's daughter also visited the set and did not speak to Jack Cunningham due to his jailer character locking her mother up in a cell. Leon's surname of Colbert was originally planned to be Cornet. Leon's actor Edward Brayshaw would be cast in another role for Season 6's The War Games, being that of the War Chief, who was a fellow member of the Doctor's species. Edward was also considered for a third Doctor Who role in the serial The Mutants, but ultimately wasn't cast. Jeffrey Wickham filmed what he thought was all his scenes as Webster, only to learn later on after being intoxicated that he needed to perform as Webster's corpse. This caused him to fall asleep and be left alone hours later to wake up all alone in the studio. The Radio Times listing for the final episode, Prisoners of Concierge, had a synopsis in certain regions that stated that the mate arrived at the safe house with some soldiers. This isn't true in the episode itself, with him coming alone to reveal that he is the individual known as James Sterling. The scene of the carriage returning the characters to the TARDIS was an insert shot from another production, the film The French Revolution, which Gateway Films had given to the BBC to use for this purpose. The Lime Grove studios throughout production would often get quite warm and set off the sprinkler systems, even during recording, which would cause them to have to halt and dry themselves and the sets off before continuing. The production team much preferred the more spacious studios within the television centre for the last 2 episodes, with them all being thankful that the production of the serial had finished when it did, with it feeling like it took forever. After the broadcast of this serial, and what would retroactively be regarded as the conclusion of Season 1, Doctor Who would have a broadcast break of 7 weeks, though while the show was off air, production would still continue behind the scenes on the remaining 2 serials that were ordered as part of its first production season. We unfortunately reach another serial that suffers from missing episodes, with episodes 4 and 5 of The Reign of Terror not having any known telerecording copies to exist. Further to this, unlike the majority of Marco Polo, there isn't any known telesnaps surviving from these episodes. 12 clips recorded off-screen in 8mm film exist for these 2 missing episodes. The 4 surviving episodes were recovered in 1985 from a Cypriot television station, which did at one point have all 6 episodes, but the vault that housed the telecopies of episodes 4 and 5 was destroyed by a bomb strike during the Turkish invasion of Cyprus 11 years prior in 1974. In total, 8 telerecording copies were created for The Reign of Terror to distribute to different countries, and while 6 of them were more than likely junked, the remaining 2 status are unknown. It's also possible that unofficial copies could have been made that are in private hands, as is the possible source of recovered episodes from future serials. In September 2000, Loose Cannon released LC-12, a reconstruction of the 2 missing episodes from surviving elements of the 2 episodes, as well as other material that was deemed appropriate to fill in the gaps. In March 2013, Loose Cannon released a revised reconstruction of The Reign of Terror, LC-37. Both of these reconstructions featured an introduction by Carol Ann Ford. In 2013, the BBC commissioned and released animated visuals matched to surviving audio for these 2 episodes, as seen in the story recap section of this video. This animation project was produced by Big Finish Productions and Theta Motion. 1993 was originally planned to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Doctor Who, with several serial releases in the VHS range, including The Reign of Terror, which had interlinking narration planned with Carol Ann Ford to explain what happened in the missing episodes 4 and 5. But this was ultimately cancelled due to John Nathan Turner leaving BBC Video. The Reign of Terror was eventually released on VHS, however, in 2003, with the previously planned Carol Ann Ford linking narration for the 2 missing episodes. As one of the last releases of the range in a single release alongside episodes 1 and 3 of Season 4's The Faceless Ones and the first episode of The Web of Fear. 20 years after its planned VHS release, The Reign of Terror would be released on DVD, being restored by the Doctor Who restoration team, as well as having its 2 missing episodes animated, as previously mentioned. As of 2025, the Season 1 collection set has yet to be announced, and thus the serial has not made the jump to a Blu-ray release, with the 2 animated episodes produced in standard definition being an interesting thing to think about when it comes to them being upgraded to 1080p, though they most likely just get a standard upscale, in a similar vein to the Blu-ray release of the 1996 Doctor Who movie, due to the BBC not having access to the source material. In late 2023, The Reign of Terror was added to BBC iPlayer, though episode 2 is noticeably sourced from an original source tape instead of the DVD restoration, leading to the end credits theme being warped. Just like with the rest of the back catalogue on BBC iPlayer, its future inclusion is up for question due to streaming rights for the serial, with several classic Who serials being absent from iPlayer for this reason. In 1987, The Reign of Terror was released in novelisation form, written by Ian Marter of 4th Doctor companion Harry Sullivan fame. This would have been the first time people who either missed the serial the first time or people who wanted to revisit it since its original broadcast would have gotten the chance to experience the story. In 2022, this novelisation was released in audiobook form, narrated by Jamie Glover, who had been cast as William Russell in the 2013 docudrama An Adventure in Space and Time, as well as taken on the role of Ian Chesterton in the Big Finish audio drama First Doctor Adventures range, alongside David Bradley. Ian makes a valid point at the beginning of A Land of Fear, where the longer they leave it to return home, the harder it will be to do so. This is a character arc that the modern show has portrayed many times, with multiple human companions becoming so in tune with this lifestyle of travelling through space and time that they evolve into something else. The Doctor is very stubborn at the start of this episode, with Ian and Barbara buttering him up and pretending that he is able to control the destination of his ship, when all 3 of them know he can't, including himself, despite him not wanting to admit it. I enjoy how Ian and Barbara know the Doctor by this point, and decide to play along with him, thus not repeating the mistakes of past serials, where they get into arguments, showing a level of character progression for them. The start of Guests of Madame Guillotine uses an obvious insert shot to make it look like Ian is in the room with Susan and Barbara while they are being sentenced, but it's very clear he is not actually in the same location due to William Russell being on holiday. Barbara slapping the jailer after he tries to come on to her was very much deserved, showing how Barbara will not stand for that awful behaviour and will fight for herself. The characters continue to compare their current situation to past adventures, with the smell of the prison cell reminding Barbara of their very first adventure in the prehistoric age, this being a particular aspect of the 60s era of Doctor Who that I continue to enjoy. It reminds us that they've lived through the events we've seen them in. Barbara also reminds Susan to have hope based on these past situations, and while Susan's pessimism could be seen as her again being written as a standard teenager with no hope, Susan has a point in perhaps that their luck will run out eventually. Susan, usually being so optimistic, has lost that, with her being concerned that her grandfather has perished in the fire. Hartnell's doctor has a comedic moment where he tricks the guard in order to escape and continue his journey to Paris, with him chuckling after knocking the guard out with a shovel and stating, "Good day to you, sir." LeMaitre instantly gives me the inkling within episode 2 that he is actually a double agent, secretly working for someone else, which is confirmed to be true by the final episode, with his real identity being the mysterious James Sterling. During the scene where the jailer gives Ian the food at the beginning of A Change of Identity, you can see that the cell he put it in isn't the same one Ian is in, and is in fact very narrow, with the back wall being very close to the door, again being another indication that Ian's scenes were filmed separately from the majority of this episode. The Doctor is yet again able to use his intelligence to manipulate people around him to gain an advantage, with him being more than willing to get rid of his ring, something I doubt he'd have done back at the beginning of the season when he first met the school teachers. This serial reminds me how much I love the Doctor taking charge of a situation, showing he's constantly working to figure things out. Episode 3 establishes that Diargason also got killed alongside Rouvray, when that isn't conveyed very well in the first episode, where it looks like they just capture him instead. This serial is the second time that Barbara has had a potential love interest, with her ultimately turning them all down, with expanded media establishing that her and Ian become a couple. The ending of episode 3 shows Hartnell's acting skill with his eye movement, where for a few seconds you can see the Doctor drop the facade for a bit. This is something that makes me glad this episode survives, as it would be very difficult to replicate via animation. The animation for both of the missing episodes, despite having some uncanny facial movements and some awkward shots to fill in blank spaces, in my opinion fits in quite well with its surrounding surviving episodes, clearly being more faithful to the original production than future animated releases would be, though the audio quality is a noticeable downgrade due to the way it was preserved. The art style for the animation uses shadows to its advantage, giving depth to what would otherwise be quite flat character models. We start to see LeMaitre become suspicious of the Doctor within this episode, which is an aspect the animation on his face still conveys, despite the original episode most likely being portrayed with more authenticity, due to it being a real actor. This serial, again, seems to forget that Susan isn't a human, as she becomes ill with a human illness, and they inquire to get her to see a human doctor. This is in stark contrast to the previous serial, The Censorites, that remembered she isn't human and had her utilise her otherworldly abilities. Again, it shows how the writers seem to not know what to do with her in these situations, so just give her generic storylines so she has something to do. This episode reveals something different compared to the last time Barbara had feelings for a character. That being that the character she has feelings for turns out to be her enemy, which would no doubt complicate things, with the following episode showing the outcome of this, not changing the fact that she still cared for Leon as a person. It's interesting how Susan doesn't show up within episode 5 until the 10-minute mark. Again, she draws the short straw in terms of what they do with her character. Jules' sister, Danielle, has also disappeared, not being seen for quite some time. I think it could have been potentially interesting to have had Danielle turn out to be the traitor, someone they'd least expect, and the weight of what Jules would have to decide to do would have been felt even more, with it having the potential to show that this conflict even went as far as tearing once loyal family members apart. Further to Jules' sister disappearing, we also haven't seen Jean for quite some time. though this is easily explained as him having gone to the house seen in episode 1 to look for the Doctor. Though for some reason he doesn't seem to return in what seems to be days later, as depicted with the time jump with the meeting between Barras and Bonaparte. Barbara brings up a point about there being good people on both sides of this conflict, which reminds me of a similar theme brought up within Star Wars The Clone Wars, as well as being mentioned in the Revenge of the Sith movie opening crawl. Hartnell has a line fluff within episode 5, where he briefly mispronounces the word release. This serial in particular has had a lot less of these, especially compared to the previous, the Sensorites. Barbara's clearly quite paranoid that they could get found at any moment by this point in the episode. She probably just wants to return to the TARDIS and leave. Ian realises how Barbara felt about Leon. He does care for Barbara's feelings. Barbara's rightfully just sick and tired of all the death that they keep encountering, a very valid point that to this day is still relevant in real life. What with continuous world events leading to so many deaths of innocent people caught in the crossfire of conflict, which continues to happen in the world as long as it benefits someone. It's funny how the cast members awkwardly stand in silence while the title card and writer credits display for the final episode. A neat little detail present to back up James Sterling's claim that he prefers to do things on his own is when he begins to instruct Jules on what to do before Jules stops him. It feels like Ian is having fun being undercover as an innkeeper. He's really committed to his role. The camera used for the meeting room in the inn seems to have parts of the scene stretched on the right-hand side in certain shots, warping the width of the actors' heads. Barbara references the Aztecs when conversing with the Doctor about them not being able to change history, which she finds slightly amusing when thinking about James's attempt to prevent Robespierre's execution. Barbara's character development from the Aztecs has not been forgotten and has become part of her learnt knowledge, unlike other examples of future characters within this show, where they seem to not utilise any of their past experience. This is another nice moment between the Doctor and Barbara. These are always a highlight within these serials, as I've mentioned in previous videos. It's nice to see him treat her as his intellectual equal. I am not surprised that Robespierre being shot in the jaw happened off screen, that being something I doubt any TV show would have outright depicted back in 1964, plus I don't know if they'd even be able to portray the effects of it. The Doctor calling the jailer a half-wit got a chuckle out of me. It's clear that he just switches his loyalty to whoever is in power at that time and has no ideals of his own. He just wants to save his own skin. Susan's lack of usage outside of being a plot device to delay the Travellers' ability to leave reminds me how by this point they knew that they were going to write her out 2 serials later, and so have actively sidelined her. To further support Susan being a plot device in this serial is how her illness practically disappears once she gets rearrested. Susan's hairstyle in the prison when the Doctor reunites with her looks nice, but seems a bit too tidy for someone who has been locked in a cell for several days. I love the speech at the end of the episode. While this episode isn't the final one commissioned for the first season, it's a nice place to add the speech to, considering there would be a break in broadcasting before the next serial, with the remaining 2 that were commissioned becoming the first 2 stories of season 2. Overall, I find The Reign of Terror quite enjoyable, despite it having the characters locked in cells multiple times. We get to see the friction of the political situation in France at this time of huge conflict, where lots of people are being executed for having certain beliefs. While Susan is unfortunately sidelined into a plot device, her usage here is still better than in the Keys of Marinus. The BBC, yet again, were really able to pull off the historical setting despite the cramped studio space, with the set and costume designs continuing to be really well executed. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. My current goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, so if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment. Until the next time, goodbye.